Okay, hi everybody. There's just a few things that we have to go through when we start looking at our camera functions. I'm using a Canon product here today for this demonstration, and that will vary with your camera, but the basis of what these functions are will all be the same. Okay, they just will be in different menus in different locations. So we're going to look at just some of the basic functions, right? So usually you have a wheel up by your index finger, right? And usually that wheel is defaulted to the shutter speed. So as you can see, I roll the wheel and it changes the shutter speeds in the camera, okay? So that's in manual mode, M for manual, okay? In order to change the aperture or f-stop, I have to hold a button down. There's usually a plus and minus button somewhere on your camera. On Nikons, it's on the top. On Canons, it's on the back where your thumb is. And if you hold that down, you can see that it now highlighted a different menu option there, right? So if you hold that down and then use the same wheel, you can change your f-stop or aperture. Okay? Now this camera is really nice in that it has the ISO button right on top, and I can adjust my ISO. Okay? So that's pretty nifty and it works pretty well. But let's go through a couple of the icons. I have my wheel on top here, so there's M. Now if I go to AV or A, that's aperture priority. And this, what happens here is that if I'm in this mode, the wheel defaults and it only uses the aperture. Okay? So as I move the wheel, I am picking the f-stop or the aperture and the camera will pick everything else. That is in what we call aperture priority. Okay? All right, if we go to T for time, that is called shutter priority. And again, the wheel will default so that the only thing that works is the shutter when I move the wheel back and forth. And you can see it shows slow and fast, that we freeze on subject or let it move and get some blurriness out of it, okay? So pretty cool. That's pretty simple how those things work. And then you have P for program. And this is just kind of, we make a joke about it and call it P for professional. But really, the camera's controlling everything. But program works pretty well. If I'm out somewhere and my wife and I are doing something and I want a picture of us taken, I would usually put the camera on P, hand it to the person who's going to take our picture, I look at it. Sometimes I leave it on manual, make adjustments, but oftentimes I just will leave it on program and give it to them, and that works pretty good. Okay? All right. Well, we have to get into some menu options here. And let me get back out of here. I have to be in manual in order to have access to all of the menu functions, okay? So if I click my menu button, okay, now I can get into various menu functions. When you're in the program setting, that's automatic, and you won't even see a lot of those menu functions like I didn't see because I had it in program. So you have to be in manual, and that will expose, no pun intended, more of the menu functions here. So here we have a bunch of stuff. Let's go through some things, okay? Image quality. What is RAW? What are these, okay? Well, image quality is the relative quality of what you're using. Watch the, this is 24 megapixel camera, so it's 6,000 by 4,000. If I change my JPEG setting down here, and hang on, let me get to it. There we go. If you notice while I get that, see it change from a large fine JPEG to a medium JPEG. See it change from 24 megapixels to 11 megapixels. So that's what we call knocking the resolution down, or JPEGing it down, okay? 11, 5.9. Now why would you ever want to take a beautiful 24 megapixel camera and knock it down to 5.9? Well, you'd want to do that at certain times because maybe you want to email some pictures, and there's usually a meg limit on the email server. So if you wanted to send some pictures, or you don't want to send a full high resolution picture that somebody will be able to take and use without your permission, right? So you send them a lower resolution file, okay? All right, let's get this back. Okay, so that's a little bit about resolution. Now, what's a RAW file? A RAW file is simply data. There's nothing done to it. A JPEG, Joint Photography Engineers Group, has a little contrast added, a little color saturation added, and a little sharpening added. A RAW file has none of those, and you must now process a RAW file. Yes, there's more information available in a RAW file, but it also requires you to process it. I shoot both depending upon the situation. If it's a once-in-a-lifetime place, I'm at the Grand Canyon, it's a beautiful sunrise, you bet I'm shooting RAW. If I'm just walking around my house, taking some pictures to get out of the house, or I'm going for a walk with my neighbors or something, I'm shooting JPEGs, right? So there's really a variety of reasons to use different functions. But for that one, it just depends on your situation, right? I still shoot JPEGs, even for jobs that I shoot professionally once in a while, okay? All right, so image quality, image review. How long do you want it to come up on the screen before you get out of it, right? Release without shutter. This can be a big deal. Now, most of the cameras now will tell you if you don't have a memory card in it, but they didn't used to. And what would happen is that people would shoot, and you'd see the picture come up on the screen, but they didn't have a memory card in it, and they thought they took pictures, but they didn't, so they didn't ever get recorded. But now I always have that disabled just in case. Lens aberration correction, too much stuff to get into. Let's just say this is a digital camera, and they're able to map out any issues with the lens design digitally, and they're able to apply digital corrections to it in camera. Pretty cool stuff, right? Okay, drive mode. We can see these are the universal symbols here for continuous, silent, single. There's your timers, 10-second, 2-second, right? So a variety of functions here. We're going to be on single shooting, okay? All right. Exposure compensation just allows you to make the picture brighter or darker by pushing a button, but that's in the automatic modes or program mode, and we're going to be in manual eventually, so we won't be messing with exposure compensation. Here's another way to adjust our ISO. You can get in here and adjust your ISO, right, with the wheel on the back. And you can often set your max ISO speed if you want to, okay? Auto lighting optimizer, again, this is a digital camera. They're able to map everything out that the camera does and apply corrections as necessary, tone priority, all of these things. Metering mode, this is kind of one we want to look at. If you can find your metering mode, again, these are universal symbols. Some may look a little bit different than this, but evaluated, partial, spot, and center weighted average, right? We want to be on kind of the standard or kind of the first option that we have, okay? My phone's going off. So we want to try and stay with the regular mode, that kind of the standard or maybe the first option that you have. We'll get into light meters in a few days and get into this in more great detail. Okay? White balance, this is a big deal. We want to stay on auto white balance. Oops. Auto white balance. We want to stay on auto white balance, AWB. There's others here, daylight, shade, cloudy, tungsten light, fluorescent, flash. These are all universal symbols that will be on every camera. But for us, for this class, for now, we want to stay on auto white balance. Okay? You can do custom, you can change the color, color space you can change. Picture style, here's one we want to get into and find somewhere. There's an auto, standard, portrait, landscape, bunch of stuff like that, right? We want to get into this monochrome setting so that we can take black and white pictures, right? So I can take a picture over here in my little studio area, and it will come up black and white. So that's pretty cool, right? And what black and white allows us to do is kind of, get ourselves away from any color bias we might have. So black and white, we're just looking at the value, the reflective value of the subjects or objects in the picture. So black and white's a great way to start, and that's one of your first assignments is black and white, okay? All right, shooting settings. We're back to shooting settings. Monochrome, black and white. So we want to find black and white. Okay, long exposure noise reduction, high ISO speed noise reduction, dust delete, all these functions. There's so many buttons to push in here that it gets a little confusing. But just scroll through the menu and read some of the stuff and get familiar with what it is. Here's a big one, our autofocus operations, right? There are often many functions in the autofocus, one shot, AI focus, AI servo. AI focus is continuously focusing. So that can be really good for doing event work, where lots of things are happening quickly and the camera's focusing all the time, but it chews up the battery, okay? And AI servo is really cool. We'll get into this more when we get into motion in a few weeks. AI servo, or tracking, allows the camera to track an object and it will stay in focus even if that object comes closer to you or goes further away. So it's really cool. That works really, really well. But for now, we're going to just be in one shot, okay? All right, cool. All right. So that's our shooting menus, okay? So there's lots of other things that we can get into as we get going on what the camera will allow us to do. And playback settings, this one has wireless on it, amazing stuff. I mean, you can send this to your iPad, you can look at them on your phone. And here's some other function settings as well, and some cool displays. You can change the displays on this camera, so that's pretty cool. We want to look at some of these function settings, because here's one that's important, formatting your card, right? That can be a little scary, but to format the card, you're going to wipe off everything that you had on there. So be sure when you press format that that's really what you want to do. Okay? Auto power off, you can tell it how long to shut down when you're not taking a picture or getting ready to take a picture. You can set your display brightness screen, bunch of different kinds of stuff, okay? Video system, you know, what video system do you want to use? If you're in a foreign country, you may want to use a different video system. This is all about your HDMI and various functions for your, that's what I'm using, HDMI plugged into the TV here. Okay. Now here's a really important one to find is clear settings. Okay. So if you're pushing a bunch of buttons on the camera and you get lost or the camera won't work right, find this menu. It's on every camera will have this. Clear settings, and that will clear the camera back to when you first took it out of the box and it was brand new. It'll have all the factory settings on it. So there's also custom functions where you can change the level of your adjustability and so many things to get into. But this is a big one to find Because you can't hurt these cameras. I mean, obviously if you drop them, you hurt them. But I mean, by pushing buttons, you're not going to mess anything up. Because you can always go to here and clear it and start over again. So I encourage you to push buttons and find out what things do, right? I think that's really important. Okay? Copyright information, and this is your firmware, right? What operating system the camera is using. And camera companies will issue firmware updates, just like they issue updates for your computers. They will issue firmware updates. Maybe there's a new lens, maybe there's a correction in the autofocus, maybe there's an correction in the high ISO noise reduction math algorithm, that they've come up with some new math formula and it works better. So they'll allow you to upgrade and restore and put in different firmware, okay? So it's just some basic functions here to get into and look at what we can do with our cameras. So pretty cool. Find that black and white setting, very important, and take some pictures in black and white, because black and white allows us to kind of get away from any color bias, right? And we simply start looking at the value of what is there in our subject, right? The light and dark. Very important that we begin to look at the value of a scene or situation rather than the color. Okay, so that'll be the big deal that we start off with right away here, is doing some black and white photography and getting used to seeing what's there in terms of brightness and darkness. Okay, great. See you next week.